Imagine earning millions from just a podcast. It would have been difficult to believe a decade ago, but thanks to online interactions, people like Joe Rogan are rolling in top dollar. The former MMA star has a reported net worth of millions. But where does the money come from and where does it go? In this video, we'll talk about Joe Rogan's take on spending money on firearms and other ways he contributes to his immense wealth. First up, Joe Rogan is more invested in firearms than expected. Joe Rogan is a melting pot of talents, and we just can't get over the fact that a single person can do so much. The guy first made a name for himself in martial arts, but thought that it was better to comment on it than actually make it big in the game. So he became a color UFC commentator. But what really kicked off for him was his podcast show. He began his podcast in 2009, in which he doesn't simply talk trash about irrelevant things. The Joe Rogan Experience is about experiencing life and discussing unconventional topics. That's why it consistently ranks amongst the top Apple podcasts. Coming back to the things Rogan stands for, something the podcaster puts real emphasis on are gun rights. Joe has been quite vocal about this issue for many years and has even taken it up on his own shows. His support for gun rights dates as far back as 2012 when he tweeted that guns and marijuana is an interesting topic for debate and that he's pro-guns. He genuinely supports gun rights for the American people and has even termed them as the best martial arts. Many people may not agree with him, but his 15.8 million followers on Twitter sure like to hit the like button when he posts videos of his shoot practice. He's so invested in the idea that he reportedly spends thousands of dollars of his hard-earned money on firearms. Up next, Joe Rogan trolls Hollywood over gun control hypocrisy. One of the most famous podcast hosts in America thinks we can all learn a lot about guns and how to handle them. Sharing his thoughts about the issue on his podcast with Tim Kennedy, Joe said that America has a mental health problem disguised as a gun problem and a tyranny problem disguised as a security problem. He even shares videos of his firearms training with his fans, where he openly shares that he gets excited when he has a lot to learn about certain things, even guns. Roe is determined to talk about Americans' fundamental rights and has been a staunch gun advocate. He even took a dig at Hollywood norms of promoting guns or gun culture in movies, but talking against it otherwise. Joe makes a fair point because he thinks that Hollywood movies doesn't take a second to think when they're glorifying firearms use, but would try to put a ban on them. Talking to Tim Dillon on his podcast, Rogan pointed out that it's blatant hypocrisy because Hollywood is anti-gun in general, but all their big-budget movies like Mission Impossible or James Bond are all about weapons. He wasn't wrong when he said that Hollywood promotes firearms more than any other media on the planet. If there's an alien, kill it with a gun. A werewolf? No worries, blow a hole in his head. Mutated monsters? Let's take out the bazooka. Joe Rogan himself has a very eye-watering gun collection in which each gun costs over $1,000 and upwards. Coming up, where does Joe Rogan's 120 million net worth come from? Joe Rogan has worked extremely hard to make his fortune. According to resources, the former UFC commentator is reportedly worth a whopping $120 million. Some celebrities don't even come close to that figure. Rogan has to thank his many business ventures and talents for his great fortune. While many people may think that all his money comes from his podcast show and hosting gigs, you'd be surprised to know that many balls are rolling for Rogan. He doesn't hide the fact that he's loaded. Let's take a look at Rogan's various ways of earning millions while we look at our bank accounts and shed a tear or two. First up, brand endorsements. Every YouTuber, Instagrammer, athlete, and celebrity has to thank this elixir of life called brand endorsements. Once you secure a few solid contracts, you're good for years. That's also the case for Joe Rogan, who never fails to endorse the products he uses with his millions of followers on various social media platforms. Being a health enthusiast, Rogan promotes brands like Whistle Pig Rye Whiskey and is sponsored by names like Calm, Athletic Greens, Bambi, and more. Since he's a health fanatic and loves to take his supplements, he's also the face of promoting various supplements and health drinks. Next up, comedy tours and Hollywood ventures. One of Joe Rogan's major gigs after giving up on a kickboxing career was stand-up comedy. He was encouraged by a few supporting friends, and taking inspiration from Live on the Sunset Strip, he started with small gigs. He worked his way up to the ladder until he was finally given a breakthrough by MTV with his show Half-Hour Comedy Show, and the rest is history. Now he gets to do tours around the world and is paid over $10,000 per show for a 90-minute set. During his transition from struggling to a rising comedian, Rogan also landed a few roles in Hollywood, including acting in a sitcom called Hardball. He also appeared on NBC's sitcom News Radio for 4 years, which also helped him add a good amount to his increasing wealth. Since Joe Rogan was known to be wacky and funny, it was obvious that he would be landing a center role in one of the over-the-top reality shows, and he did. It wasn't long before he became the host of one of NBC's most popular reality shows, Fear Factor. Rogan hosted 6 seasons of The Fearful Show and reportedly fished in about $100,000 per episode. Wow, oh wow. The guy hosted about 150 episodes, so that makes it worth $15 million that he earned from a single show alone. Now, for recent multi-million-dollar deals, the biggest news on the blog right now is Joe Rogan's ginormous Spotify deal. Yes, we know what you're thinking. Spotify is a music listening platform. But to put up with giants like Google and Apple, Spotify thought to boost its platform by onboarding podcast royalty, and who better than Joe Rogan for the role? Spotify announced a deal reportedly worth over $100 million to give licensing agreement to host the Joe Rogan Experience back in 2021. But after recent negotiations, the recalculated value is at least $200 million, so it's more green for Mr. Rogan. Joe's podcast on Spotify is now the biggest on the platform in over 92 other markets. Moving on, hosting shows and podcasts. Of course, one of Joe's biggest means of earning is his podcast that he started in 2009 and the countless shows he has hosted. He frequently hosts UFC championships even now and earns a handsome amount of $50,000 per UFC event. This makes his annual salary from only show hosting up to $550,000. As for his podcast, Rogan has taken a massive paycheck of $75,000 per podcast episode ever since the exclusive Spotify deal. The UFC commentator comfortably earns about $60 million annually and is worth $120 million at the moment. Following that, how does Joe Rogan like to spend his millions? When you earn handsomely, you gotta spend it even more handsomely. That's at least the mantra that Joe Rogan follows because he doesn't let a dime go to waste if it's not for luxury. Apart from what he usually does, this is how he spends his millions in a more stylish way. First on the list is real estate. Property is every millionaire celebrity's go-to spending area, and Rogan is no exception. The comedian owns several properties across the US, but his major purchase was way back when he bought a $2 million home in Bell Canyon, California. He lived in that house for a decade until he sold it for $3 million and later bought a lavish $14.4 million mansion in 2017. The 12 acres property is located in Austin, Texas, and covers an 8,000 square foot main house, a tennis court, a guest house, and a pool. He recently revamped this property into a Texas-inspired modern farmhouse. Next up, exotic car collection. While Rogan's collection may not be gigantic, he has a few expensive cars in his garage. He has a few prized possessions, which include a Bentley Continental GT that starts at $200,000, a Porsche 911 Turbo S, and a Tesla Model S that comes with a hefty price tag of $100,000. He also owns a few vintage pieces, including a 1960 Ford Bronco, a 2014 Ford Mustang, and a $69,900 BMW M3. The castle. We have his expensive taste and collectibles. Rogan has an expensive taste both in food and collectibles. We already know that he owns a very expensive collection of firearms, but he also likes to spend lavishly on his dining. The podcaster reportedly enjoys eating exotic meat, including elk meat. He thinks that it's of great nutritional value, but it costs about $18.90 per pound, and he eats it daily. That's a wrap for this video. Tell us about your favorite Joe Rogan podcast episode. Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.